The sun had not yet fully risen, and the quiet town still lay wrapped in a blanket of morning mist. The air carried a soft chill, the kind that makes people pull their sweaters a little closer. The streets were nearly empty, except for the faint sound of a few birds singing from the rooftops. The small white building at the end of Willow Street stood out in the soft light. It was the town's only clinic, a place where many lives had been saved over the years. And inside, a gentle and kind-hearted woman was just arriving to begin her day. Dr. Elena Morgan parked her small blue car near the clinic and stepped out, stretching her arms after the short drive. She loved the early hours, the peaceful silence before the day became busy with patients, phone calls, and emergencies. She often said these quiet minutes were like a gift, a small time where she could breathe, think, and feel grateful for the work she did. She unlocked the gate and walked toward the door, humming softly to herself. Her long brown coat moved with the light breeze, and her shoes clicked gently against the stone path. But as she reached for the door handle, something unusual caught her attention. A soft sound came from the shadows near the entrance. At first, it was barely a whisper, almost like the faint sound of someone breathing. She paused and tilted her head, listening carefully. Then, she heard it again, this time a little louder. It wasn't just any sound. It was a whimper. A weak, trembling whimper. Her heartbeat picked up slightly. Over the years, she had seen many early morning visitors' patients in pain, parents with sick children, sometimes even lost pets, but this sound felt different. There was something desperate and fragile in it. She stepped closer to the door and scanned the small front porch area. That's when she saw a dot in the dim morning light. A small dog stood near the steps. Its fur was dirty and tangled, as if it had been wandering the streets for a long time. Its body was thin, and its ribs showed faintly through its coat. Its ears were folded down, and its tail was tucked between its legs. But the most striking thing was its eyes. Large, round, and full of something she could not ignore, pure worry. Elena slowly crouched down, trying not to scare the animal. "Hey there," she whispered gently, her voice soft like a feather. The dog took a step forward, but kept its head low, as if it was unsure whether to trust her. In its mouth, it carried something. At first glance, it looked like an old, crumpled piece of cloth, the kind people throw away. But the way the dog held it told her it was something important. The little creature whimpered again, a sound that went straight to Elena's heart. It carefully approached her, and then did something she would remember for the rest of her life. With slow, gentle movements, the dog lowered its head and placed the bundle at her feet. Then it backed away slightly, but didn't run. It stood there, trembling but hopeful, its eyes fixed on her face. Elena stared at the bundle, her mind spinning with confusion and curiosity. It was wrapped in an old faded blanket, tied loosely at the edges. A faint sound came from inside, a soft, fragile noise, almost like the flutter of a tiny bird's wings. Her hands trembled slightly as she knelt down and slowly unwrapped a corner of the cloth. What she saw made her breath catch. Inside the bundle was a baby, a tiny newborn, wrapped clumsily but tightly enough to stay warm. The baby's face was pale but peaceful, its low mouth opening slightly as if searching for air. Its fingers were curled into tiny fists, and its chest rose and fell with the softest breaths. For a few seconds, Elena couldn't move. The world seemed to pause. She could hear nothing but the faint breaths of the baby and the soft whimper of the dog beside her. She felt the morning air brush against her face, and her heart beat faster and louder with each second. She finally exhaled a shaky breath and whispered, "Oh my goodness." Her hands carefully lifted the tiny baby from the cold stone ground. The infant was lighter than she expected. She held the child close to her chest, protecting it from the morning chill. The baby gave a weak little sound, not quite a cry, but enough to make her eyes water. The dog let out a soft bark, almost as if asking if the baby would be okay. Elena looked down at it. The animal was still standing there, its legs slightly trembling, its fur wet from the morning dew. Its ears perked up each time the baby made a sound. She realized then that this little creature had been carrying the baby gently in its mouth, keeping it safe as best as it could. "Did you bring this baby here?" Elena asked softly, even though she knew the dog couldn't answer. But strangely, the dog responded in its own way. It wagged its tail slightly and sat down on the porch, watching her every move with hopeful, pleading eyes. She could hardly believe what was happening. In her many years as a doctor, she had seen many extraordinary things. But a stray dog delivering a baby to her clinic was something she had only heard of in stories, never in real life. Her hands were steady now. The doctor in her took over. She quickly pushed open the clinic door with her shoulder and stepped inside, cradling the baby carefully. The warmth of the building embraced them immediately. She called out for a nurse, but it was still early, and she was the first to arrive. That didn't matter. She had handled emergencies alone before. She placed the baby gently on a clean bed in the reception area, wrapped it in a soft, warm towel she grabbed from a nearby cabinet, and checked its breathing. The tiny chest moved weakly, but it moved. The baby was alive. Outside, the dog waited. It did not try to run away, even though it was clearly a stray. Its fur was unkempt, and its paws were muddy. It had probably walked a long way through the night. Still, it sat there quietly, as if it understood this was a safe place now. Elena returned to the doorway and looked at the dog again. "You're a good one," she said softly. "A real hero." She didn't know who had left the baby or how the dog had found it. But one thing was clear. Without this dog, the baby might not have made it through the cold night. The dog tilted its head, listening to her calm voice, and then lay down near the door. Its eyes half open but alert. It wasn't just tired, it looked relieved. As if its mission was complete, Elena knew she had to act fast. She picked up her phone and called the on-call nurse, telling her to come immediately. Then she prepared warm blankets, a tiny oxygen mask, and everything she needed to make sure the baby was safe. But even as she worked, part of her mind kept going back to the moment outside, the look in the dog's eyes, the way it had gently carried the bundle, and the quiet courage it had shown. The early morning mist slowly began to fade, and soft golden sunlight spilled over the clinic walls. The quiet town was beginning to wake up. But inside that small white building, a quiet miracle had already happened. Elena glanced at the clock. Only 15 minutes had passed since she arrived, but it felt like a lifetime. She had walked into the clinic expecting another ordinary day, but fate had other plans. A stray dog had trusted her enough to bring her a life that needed saving. She turned back to the baby, whose breathing had become a little stronger under the warm towel. She smiled softly, brushing a stray lock of hair from her forehead. "You're safe now," she whispered. Outside, the dog gave a soft, tired bark, as if it understood her words. It curled up on the porch, resting its head on its paws, keeping its eyes on the door. It wasn't going anywhere. It had delivered its tiny treasure to the only person it trusted, and now it was waiting to see what would happen next. The doctor knew deep in her heart that this was not just a coincidence. Something extraordinary had taken place on this quiet morning. 2 lives, 1 tiny human, and 1 loyal stray had crossed paths, and in doing so, they had changed everything. She didn't know yet what story lay behind this mysterious baby or how the dog had found it. But she did know one thing with absolute certainty. This was only the beginning. The air inside the clinic grew warmer as the sun climbed higher. The soft golden light from outside touched the edges of the room, making everything seem calm and safe. But inside Dr. Elena Morgan's chest, her heart was beating fast. She still couldn't believe what had just happened outside the clinic door. A stray dog had carried a tiny baby to her, something she would have never imagined in her entire life. The baby now lay on a small hospital bed, wrapped in a soft towel. Elena leaned over and gently placed her fingers near the baby's tiny nose to feel the faint breaths. They were weak but steady. The baby's skin, once cold, was slowly turning warm again. She carefully placed a small blanket over the infant to keep it cozy. Outside, the dog was still sitting near the entrance, watching everything through the glass door. Its fur was damp, its paws dirty, but its eyes shone with a kind of soft light, a mix of worry, hope, and trust. Every time the baby moved or made a small sound, the dog lifted its head quickly, its ears perking up as if it wanted to make sure everything was all right. Elena stood near the door for a moment and just looked at the animal. She felt something deep inside her heart, a kind of quiet respect. "You're special," she whispered softly. You knew what to do. Just then, the sound of footsteps echoed through the hallway. It was Nurse Clara, rushing in with her long brown hair tied up and a soft scarf around her neck. She had received Elena's early morning call and hurried as fast as she could. "Elena," Clara said as she opened the door. "What happened? You sounded serious on the phone." Elena pointed toward the small hospital bed. "Come see for yourself." Clara hurried over, and when her eyes landed on the tiny bundle, her mouth fell slightly open. "Oh my goodness," she whispered. "Is that a baby?" "Yes," Elena replied softly, still watching the small face. "And guess who brought it here?" Clara turned her head toward the entrance, following Elena's gaze. When she saw the stray dog lying on the porch, she covered her mouth with her hand. "No way," she whispered. "Yes," Elena said. "That little one found the baby somewhere and carried it all the way here. I don't know how or where from, but it did." Clara knelt beside the hospital bed, gently touching the baby's soft blanket. "This is unbelievable," she said. "This baby is so tiny. Probably just a few days old." Elena nodded. "I think so too." The baby was wrapped in an old blanket, nothing else. No name. Just this tiny life and a dog who wouldn't give up. For a brief moment, both women stood silently beside the child. The soft sound of the baby's breathing filled the room. It was like listening to a small whisper of life itself. Clara finally took a deep breath and said, "We should check the baby's temperature and oxygen level, and call the local authorities. They need to know." Elena agreed. But before doing anything else, she carefully lifted the baby and held it against her chest. She could feel the tiny heartbeat against her hand. It was weak, but there. It made her eyes soften. Clara gently placed a small sensor on the baby's hand to check the oxygen. The numbers on the screen blinked for a few seconds and then settled. "Good," Clara said with relief. "It's not perfect, but stable. We can work with this." As they worked, the dog remained outside, watching quietly. It didn't try to leave. Even though it looked tired and hungry, it kept its eyes fixed on the baby, as if its job was not done yet. Elena decided to step outside for a moment. She opened the door gently, and the dog slowly got to its feet. Its tail wagged a little, but it still looked unsure. She knelt down, holding her hands out carefully. "Hey there," she said softly. "You did something very kind today." The dog tilted its head, ears moving slightly. It didn't bark or run. Instead, it took a small step toward her. Up close, Elena could see it was a young dog, maybe no more than 2 years old. Its fur was a mix of white and brown, though dirty from the streets. She noticed small scratches on its legs and a slight limp when it walked. "You've been through a lot, haven't you?" she whispered. The dog sniffed her hand carefully, then gave it a gentle lick. That was enough for her. She smiled and patted its head softly. "Good dog," she said warmly. she went back inside and returned with a small bowl of water and some leftover bread from the nurse's kitchen. She placed it near the entrance. The dog hesitated for a moment, then slowly approached and began drinking. It was clear it hadn't eaten properly in a while. Elena's chest tightened at the thought of it wandering alone at night back inside. Clara gently rocked the baby in her arms while checking its heartbeat again. "You know," she said softly, "this little one must have been outside all night. It's cold out there. If not for that dog." "I know," Elena replied quietly. "I don't even want to think about what could have happened." The baby suddenly let out a tiny sound, a weak but clear little cry. Both women turned their attention immediately. Clara smiled softly. "That's a good sign," she said. "It's finding its voice." The dog outside lifted its head the moment it heard the cry. It stood at the door, its body alert again. Elena watched the animal and felt a strange warmth spread through her. It wasn't just a dog. It was a protector, a silent guardian that had done something truly extraordinary. She picked up the phone and called the local authorities to report the case. As she spoke, she kept glancing at the dog and the baby. She explained everything carefully, the time, the location, and how the dog had brought the infant to her clinic. The person on the other end was shocked, but promised to send someone soon. Clara was preparing a small bottle of warm milk to feed the baby. The infant's tiny fingers curled around the edge of the blanket, and its face scrunched up in a way that made both women smile. Clara held the bottle gently to the baby's lips, and after a few hesitant moments, the little one began to drink. "That's it," Clara whispered softly. "You're safe now." Elena felt a lump rise in her throat as she watched the tiny chest rise and fall. She had seen many patients in her life, but there was something deeply moving about watching a baby cling to life with such quiet strength. The minutes turned into an hour, and soon the baby's color began to improve. The pale shade of its cheeks slowly turned a soft pink. The warmth of the room, the care of gentle hands, and the quiet presence of a loyal dog had made a difference. When the local officer arrived, Elena told him the entire story. He listened carefully, shaking his head in quiet amazement. "I've heard many things in this job," he said softly, "but a dog saving a baby like this? That's something special." The officer took some notes and promised to start searching the nearby areas to learn more about where the baby might have come from. But before leaving, he walked over to the dog, who was still sitting at the door. He bent down and patted its head gently. "You're a hero, little one," he said kindly. Elena decided to let the dog stay near the clinic for the day. She placed a soft towel near the door so it could rest. The animal seemed to understand it was safe now. It lay down with its head resting on its paws, eyes half closed but still keeping watch. Inside, the baby finally drifted into a peaceful sleep. Its tiny chest rose and fell softly, its hand resting near its cheek. The room was quiet, except for the soft humming of the heater and the distant sound of birds outside. Elena sat beside the hospital bed, watching the baby's calm face. "You're strong," she whispered gently, "and you're not alone anymore." She turned her head slightly and saw the dog sleeping near the door. It wasn't just a stray anymore. To her, it was part of this story now. A story that had begun with a desperate cry at dawn and was slowly turning into something beautiful. The morning mist had fully lifted, and sunlight now filled the room, making everything glow softly. It felt like hope had quietly walked into the clinic on 4 tired paws, carrying a fragile life that needed love. The little clinic on Willow Street was no longer quiet. The once calm and peaceful building was now filled with soft, steady movements, gentle whispers, and a kind of energy that came only during very important moments. Dr. Elena Morgan stood near the small hospital bed, watching the baby closely. Its tiny chest rose and fell softly, and a faint rosy glow had returned to its cheeks. But she knew this was just the beginning. The baby was still weak, and the next few hours would be very important. Nurse Clara checked the oxygen level again, carefully adjusting the small mask resting near the baby's tiny nose. "The breathing is still light," she said softly, her eyes focused. "But it's a little better than before." Elena nodded. She felt a mix of relief and worry. Relief, because the baby was alive. Worry, because it was still fragile, like a small flame in the wind. She had seen situations like this before, where every second counted. This baby needed warmth, care, and steady support. And that was exactly what they were going to give. The stray dog still sat near the glass door, just as it had been from the moment it arrived. It had finished the bread Elena had given it earlier, and now it simply lay with its head resting on its paws. But even in its rest, its eyes stayed half open, always turning toward the baby whenever it made the slightest sound. It was as if the little creature understood everything that was happening. Elena stepped closer to the bed and whispered softly, "You're doing so well, little one. You just have to keep fighting." The baby let out a small sigh, its lips parting slightly. Its tiny fingers moved a little, curling in the air as if reaching for something. Clara smiled softly. "Look," she whispered. "It's responding." Moments like this made the room feel brighter. Outside, the sun had climbed higher into the sky, covering the clinic in warm, golden light. The world seemed so ordinary, but inside, something extraordinary was unfolding. Elena gently adjusted the baby's blanket, making sure the warmth stayed in. She carefully picked the infant up, holding it against her chest. The baby was light and soft, its warmth slowly growing against her. She could feel its heartbeat, a tiny, fluttering rhythm against her chest. It was a sound that filled her heart with both tenderness and determination. She paced slowly across the room, humming a quiet tune. Clara watched from a distance, feeling the softness of the moment. "You've always had a special way with little ones," she said gently. Elena smiled faintly. "Every heartbeat is a miracle, Clara, especially this one." The door opened quietly, and Officer Daniel stepped back into the room. He was the same kind man who had come earlier when Elena reported the baby. He held a small notepad in his hand. "I've checked the nearby streets and alleys," he said softly, not wanting to disturb the baby. "So far, nothing clear. But a few neighbors mentioned seeing the dog walking through the area earlier this morning. They said it was carrying something, but they didn't know what." Clara glanced at the dog near the door and shook her head in amazement. "I still can't believe it," she said. "A dog carrying a baby like this. It almost feels like a story from a book." Officer Daniel smiled softly. "Sometimes real life surprises us more than stories." Elena carefully laid the baby back down and checked its breathing again. The oxygen number was slowly improving. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to make her heart ease a little. "Thank you, Daniel," she said. "Just keep looking. But for now, this baby needs every bit of care we can give." Daniel nodded. Before leaving, he knelt near the door to the dog's level. He reached out a hand, and the animal sniffed it carefully before giving a tiny wag of its tail. "You did something special," he whispered. Then he quietly stepped out, promising to return with updates. Inside, time began to pass slowly, like a soft river flowing through a quiet forest. Every minute mattered. Elena and Clara took turns watching over the baby. One checked the breathing. The other gently patted the baby's back or hummed softly. The sound of the baby's tiny breaths became the rhythm of the room. Outside, the dog stretched its legs a little but didn't wander far. Its fur still looked messy, and its paws were dusty from the streets. But its eyes were calm, almost peaceful now. It knew the baby was in good hands. As the afternoon light grew brighter, the baby's breathing became stronger. It made tiny, soft sounds, moving its little hands slowly as if trying to explore the air. Clara smiled every time it happened. "This little one is stronger than we thought," she whispered. "Look at it." Elena felt the same warmth spreading through her chest. "Yes," she said softly. "This little fighter isn't giving up." Then something happened that made the moment even more powerful. The baby suddenly opened its eyes. Just for a brief second, those tiny eyes fluttered open, gazing at the light above. Clara gasped softly, covering her mouth with her hand. Elena leaned closer, her heart swelling with emotion. "Hello there," she whispered with a smile. "Welcome to the world." The dog outside lifted its head quickly when it heard the sound of their voices. Its tail moved slowly from side to side. It couldn't understand their words, but it understood the feeling. Joy was in the air. Elena knew this wasn't the end of the story. The baby still needed help, care, and medical observation. But this moment, this quiet, beautiful moment, was a sign of hope. It was proof that the tiny heartbeat had found its strength again. A few hours later, Clara brought in a warm bottle of milk. Elena gently cradled the baby in her arms and carefully held the bottle to its lips. The baby hesitated for a second, then began to drink slowly. Every small swallow made her heart feel lighter. "That's it," she whispered. "That's a good baby." Clara sat near her, watching with soft eyes. "It's like the baby knows it's safe now," she said quietly. Elena nodded, never taking her eyes off the child. "Yes, safe and loved." As the baby finished the bottle, Elena gently rocked it back and forth in her arms. Its tiny eyelids slowly grew heavier, and soon it drifted into a soft sleep. She placed the baby carefully on the bed again, covering it with the soft blanket. Meanwhile, the dog outside had finally laid its head down fully. For the first time since morning, it closed its eyes completely. Its breathing was calm and deep. It looked tired but peaceful, like someone who had finally completed a long and difficult journey. Clara stepped closer to the door and whispered, "It hasn't moved from that spot all day. I've never seen anything like it." Elena smiled gently. "It's loyal. It brought the baby here. It's staying to make sure everything's all right." The nurse looked at her with a thoughtful expression. "Do you think it had a home once?" "Maybe," Elena said softly. "Or maybe it's just one of those special souls that knows how to care without being told." As the sun began to set, the sky turned a soft shade of orange and pink. The clinic was quiet again, but this time it wasn't the same quiet as in the early morning. This was a calm, warm quiet. A quiet filled with life. Elena sat on a chair near the baby's bed, the soft ticking of the wall clock filling the background. She thought about how this entire day had unfolded, how a dog with no home had carried a baby to safety, how the baby had fought for every breath, and how everyone in the clinic had come together around this tiny, precious life. She turned her head and looked at the dog. "You did something incredible today," she whispered. "Something I'll never forget." The dog lifted its head slightly at the sound of her voice, its tail moving softly. It didn't understand the words, but it understood the kindness. The baby stirred a little in its sleep, letting out a tiny sigh. Elena's heart melted. She walked to the window, looking out at the sky. The stars were just beginning to appear, shining faintly against the darkening blue. She felt something deep and quiet settle in her chest, a feeling she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. This day had started like any other, with silence and mist. But it had turned into a story that would stay with her forever. She knew tomorrow would bring more questions about where the baby came from, about what would happen next, but for now, she just let the soft, glowing warmth of the moment fill her heart. The clinic lights glowed softly, wrapping the baby, the doctor, the nurse, and the loyal stray in a blanket of calmness. And somewhere in that little building, a new bond had quietly formed, one between a tiny baby, a kind doctor, a gentle nurse, and a dog with a heart brave enough to save a life. The day slowly turned into evening, and a calm golden light filled the small clinic on Willow Street. Outside, the air was cool and soft, with the quiet sounds of birds returning to their nests. Inside, the baby lay peacefully, wrapped in a warm blanket, its tiny breaths now stronger and more steady than they were that morning. Dr. Elena Morgan sat near the baby's small bed, watching carefully. Every now and then, she placed her fingers gently near the baby's nose to feel the air. Each breath made her heart a little lighter. What had started as a desperate moment at dawn was slowly turning into something full of quiet hope. The stray dog still sat near the door, just as it had from the beginning. Its body was tired, and its eyes sometimes closed, but it never went far. Whenever the baby made a small sound, the dog's ears lifted, and it opened its eyes, watching closely. It wasn't just there out of curiosity. It was there because it cared. Nurse Clara came back into the room with a soft smile. "The baby is looking much better," she said quietly. "A few more hours of careful care, and I think it will be stable." Elena nodded, her voice soft. "Yes, this little one is stronger than we imagined." The door opened gently, and Officer Daniel returned. His hat was in his hand, and his face looked thoughtful. He had spent most of the afternoon searching the nearby area, asking neighbors questions. "I've checked almost every corner," he said softly, not wanting to disturb the sleeping baby. "No one seems to know where the baby came from. But I did find something interesting." Elena straightened in her chair. "What did you find?" Daniel walked closer, keeping his voice low. "One of the neighbors said they saw the dog early this morning. It was running along the main road with something in its mouth. It came from the small alley behind the old post office." Clara frowned softly. "That's a long way from here." Daniel nodded. "About 2 kilometers. This little dog walked all that distance with the baby. That's a long journey for a stray." Elena turned her gaze toward the dog, who was now lying curled near the door, its eyes half closed. Her heart softened even more. This dog had done something that not many humans would have the courage to do. It had carried a fragile baby across cold streets, not for a reward, not for attention, but simply because something inside it knew the baby needed help. Daniel spoke again. "The neighbors also said the dog is well known around that area. They call it Lucky. It usually wanders near the park and sleeps under a wooden bench." "Lucky," Clara repeated softly, glancing at the dog. "That's a nice name." Elena smiled faintly. "A very fitting name." Daniel nodded. "I'll continue the investigation. But for now, the most important thing is that the baby is safe." As he quietly left the clinic, a warm silence filled the room again. The soft ticking of the clock blended with the sound of the baby's breathing. Outside, the sky slowly shifted from orange to pink, then to a soft shade of purple. It was the kind of evening that made the world feel gentle. Clara walked over to the dog and sat near the door. The animal slowly lifted its head and looked at her. "Hey, Lucky," she whispered softly. "You did something amazing today." Lucky blinked slowly, its tail moving in a small, tired wag. Clara gently slid a small bowl of fresh water closer to it and placed a soft towel beside it so the dog could rest more comfortably. Lucky sniffed the towel, circled once, and then lay down with a quiet sigh. Its eyes stayed on the baby, as if it was silently guarding it. Inside the clinic, Elena carefully checked the baby's temperature again. It was warm and stable now. She smiled softly and whispered, "You're doing so well, little one." The baby moved a little in its sleep, turning its tiny head and curling its small fingers. Elena reached out gently and placed a finger near the baby's hand. To her surprise, the tiny fingers wrapped around her finger softly. It was a simple touch, but it filled her heart with something she hadn't felt in a long time. A deep sense of connection. Clara saw the moment and smiled. It's holding on to you, she whispered. Elena nodded slowly. Yes, she said softly. And I think I'm holding on to it too. Hours passed slowly, filled with gentle care. Clara warmed another bottle of milk and carefully fed the baby, while Elena prepared a small basket with soft blankets to make the child even more comfortable. Lucky never left the door, watching them silently as if it understood everything. Later that night, the clinic lights were soft and warm. Elena made herself a cup of tea and sat near the baby's bed again. Clara, sitting nearby, whispered, "You know, maybe Lucky didn't just save this baby. Maybe this baby saved Lucky too." Elena turned to her, curious. Clara smiled gently and said, "Think about it. Lucky was just a stray dog before this. Alone, wandering, cold. But now it's part of something. It's part of this story. It has a purpose." Elena's heart warmed at those words. "You might be right," she said softly. They saved each other. As the night grew deeper, Elena placed a small chair near the door where Lucky lay. She didn't want the dog to feel left out. When she sat down, Lucky opened its eyes and lifted its head. "You're safe too," she whispered softly to the dog. "You brought life to my door. I won't forget that." Lucky gently rested its head near her feet, finally closing its eyes completely. It was tired, but it felt safe there, near the baby and the kind doctor who had welcomed it. Sometime after midnight, the baby woke up and let out a soft, gentle cry, not a desperate one, but a healthy little sound. Elena rushed to its side, lifted the baby carefully, and rocked it in her arms. She hummed a soft tune she remembered from her childhood, and slowly the baby calmed down. Lucky, hearing the cry, lifted its head slightly. But seeing the baby in Elena's arms, it relaxed again and lay back down. The stars outside shone brightly, and the moonlight slipped in through the clinic windows. Elena looked at the tiny baby in her arms and then at the dog lying quietly nearby. In her heart, she felt something strong, something she couldn't quite explain. It was more than just a duty as a doctor. It was a feeling of being part of something beautiful. She whispered softly to the baby, "You came into my life in the most unexpected way, and you brought a little hero with you." By morning, news had quietly started to spread through the town. People were amazed by the story. A stray dog carrying a baby to the clinic in the early morning light. A few neighbors even came to the clinic, bringing soft blankets and tiny clothes. One woman gently stroked Lucky's fur and left a bowl of warm food for it. Everyone wanted to help. Elena wasn't used to this kind of attention, but seeing the kindness of people made her heart swell with quiet gratitude. The baby, still without a name, was becoming a little symbol of hope for everyone. And Lucky, once a stray with no home, was now seen as a hero. Clara laughed softly as she arranged the donated clothes on a small table. "You know," she said with a warm smile, "I think everyone in town has fallen in love with these two." Elena smiled too. I can't blame them. How could they not? As the sun rose again, the clinic felt brighter than it had in a long time. The baby was stronger. Lucky was no longer just a stray. And Elena, who had walked in that morning expecting a normal day, now felt her life had quietly changed. She didn't know yet what the future held for the baby or for Lucky, but in that moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was that they were safe, that they had found each other. That kindness, in its simplest form, had turned an ordinary morning into something extraordinary. Lucky slowly stood up, stretched, and walked closer to the baby's bed. It sat quietly beside it, as if taking its place as the baby's silent guardian. Elena watched the scene with soft eyes and whispered, "Some heroes don't wear capes. Some just wag their tails." And as the baby made a tiny sound in its sleep and the morning sun filled the clinic with light, it became clear to everyone who had gathered there that this was not just a story to be told once. This was the beginning of something new, something full of warmth, hope, and love. Morning sunlight spread softly across the small clinic, touching every corner with a warm, golden glow. Outside, the birds sang from the trees, and a soft breeze moved the leaves gently. Inside, everything felt peaceful. The tiny baby, who had arrived in such a surprising way just the day before, was now breathing steadily, wrapped in a soft blanket. Its cheeks had a healthy rosy color, and its little hands moved slowly in its sleep. Lucky, the stray dog who had carried the baby to safety, was lying near the door on a folded towel Elena had placed for it. It wasn't shivering anymore. It looked calmer, almost proud, as if it knew it had done something very important. Every now and then, Lucky lifted its head to look at the baby, then rested it back down again. Dr. Elena Morgan stood near the window with a warm cup of tea in her hand. She looked at the small hospital bed and then at the dog. Her heart felt full in a way she hadn't felt for a very long time. This was more than just another day at work. This was a story she would carry with her forever. Nurse Clara walked in quietly, a soft smile on her face. "Good morning," she said gently, careful not to wake the baby. Elena turned with a small smile. "Good morning, Clara." Clara looked at the baby and then at Lucky. They looked so peaceful. "You'd never guess what happened just a day ago." Elena nodded. "I know. It feels like a different world now." A few minutes later, there was a knock at the door. When Elena opened it, she found a few townspeople standing outside. They held small blankets, baby clothes, and even some dog food. Word of the dog's bravery had spread quickly through the little town, and everyone wanted to help. One of the older women from the neighborhood said softly, "We just couldn't stop thinking about that baby and the brave dog. We want to make sure they're both cared for." Elena felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Thank you," she said softly. "This means so much." Inside, the townspeople placed the little gifts on a table. One man knelt down and gently stroked Lucky's fur. The dog blinked slowly and wagged its tail. It wasn't afraid anymore. It had found warmth and kindness in a place it didn't expect. As the day went on, more people stopped by to see the baby and Lucky. No one was loud or pushy. Everyone spoke softly, as if they understood how delicate this moment was. Some people called Lucky a hero. Others simply looked at the baby with warm eyes, amazed by how strong it had become in such a short time. Clara laughed softly as she folded another tiny blanket. "This baby has become the heart of the town in one night." Elena smiled gently. "And Lucky too." Later that afternoon, Officer Daniel returned. He had been working since early morning to gather more information. His face looked calm as he walked in. "I've talked to several people," he said quietly. "We still don't know where the baby came from. But one thing is clear: Lucky carried the baby all the way here through the cold morning." He knelt beside the dog, gently scratching its ear. "This little one is something special." Elena nodded softly. "I already know that." Daniel then looked at the baby and added, "The authorities will make sure the baby is placed under good care." "But, Elena, you should know something. Since yesterday, you've been the first face this baby saw. You're the one who stayed with it through everything." Elena's heart skipped a small beat. She looked at the tiny baby, then back at Daniel. "I just did what anyone would do." Daniel smiled kindly. "Maybe, but not everyone does it with so much heart." The baby woke up slowly after a little while, letting out a soft, gentle cry. Elena quickly moved to the bedside, lifting the child in her arms. She held the baby close to her chest, and the tiny cry softened almost immediately. The baby turned its head slightly, snuggling into the warmth of her arms. Lucky, hearing the sound, lifted its head and wagged its tail. It wasn't a loud wag, just a small, happy one, like a quiet thank you. Clara watched the scene with soft eyes. "They trust you," she whispered. Both of them. Elena didn't reply at first. She just held the baby, feeling its tiny heartbeat against her chest. It was steady now, strong, alive. She thought about the first moment she had seen the little bundle on the porch, about the fear she felt, and about the small miracle that had followed. Now, standing here with the baby in her arms and Lucky watching from the floor, she felt something else, something warm and powerful. A connection. That evening, the town held a small gathering outside the clinic. It wasn't a loud or fancy event, just a group of kind people coming together. Someone brought flowers. Someone else brought warm food. A few children came with their parents, excited to see the brave dog they had heard about. Lucky sat quietly near Elena's chair, looking a little shy but not scared. The children approached carefully, and Elena guided their small hands to pet Lucky gently. The dog's tail wagged softly, and a few of the children giggled. It was a sweet, innocent sound that made everyone smile. The baby was wrapped in a soft, clean blanket and sleeping peacefully in a small crib that one of the neighbors had brought over. Every now and then, someone would peek inside to see the tiny face and smile. It was as if the whole town had adopted the little one in their hearts. Officer Daniel spoke softly to the group. Sometimes heroes come in unexpected forms. Yesterday morning, a little dog with no home carried a baby to safety. Because of that, a life was saved. This is a story our town will never forget. Everyone clapped gently, not wanting to disturb the baby. A few people even had tears in their eyes. Elena looked down at Lucky, who was sitting quietly beside her chair. She reached down and gently scratched the dog behind the ear. "You're a real hero," she whispered. Lucky wagged its tail, almost like it understood every word Dot in the days that followed. The baby grew stronger. It was fed, kept warm, and watched over with love. Lucky stayed near the clinic most of the time, never straying too far. Elena noticed how the dog always looked toward the baby's crib first thing every morning, as if checking to make sure everything was okay. One quiet afternoon, Clara turned to Elena and said softly, "Have you thought about what happens next?" Elena looked at her thoughtfully. "Yes," she said gently. "I've been thinking about it a lot." Clara nodded. "You love this baby already, don't you?" Elena didn't need to answer. The look in her eyes said it all. She had felt something special from the moment she picked up that fragile bundle on the porch. It wasn't just responsibility anymore. It was love. A few weeks later, after careful arrangements and long talks with the authorities, Elena decided to foster the baby. She wanted to give it a safe home filled with warmth. And of course, Lucky became part of that home too. The dog who once wandered the streets now had a warm bed, food every day, and most importantly, love. The day she brought both the baby and Lucky home was simple but beautiful. The baby slept quietly in a small crib by the window, and Lucky lay on the floor beside it, as if it had taken on the role of a silent guardian. Elena sat in a chair nearby, watching them both. Her heart felt full. Days turned into weeks, and weeks slowly turned into months. The baby grew stronger, laughing softly whenever Elena held it close. Lucky grew healthier too. Its fur became shiny, and its eyes brighter. The three of them became a small, happy family. People in town often stopped by to visit. They still loved to talk about the morning when Lucky brought the baby to the clinic. Children would point and say, "That's the hero dog." And Lucky would wag its tail shyly, never fully understanding why everyone loved it so much. Elena never forgot that day either. Sometimes at night, when everything was quiet, she would sit near the crib, watching the baby sleep and Lucky lying on the floor. She would remember the sound of the dog's desperate whimper at dawn, the sight of the tiny bundle on the porch, and the way hope had walked into her life in the most unexpected way. She gently whispered, "You both changed my life." As time passed, The baby learned to smile, laugh, and reach out with tiny hands. Lucky stayed by its side through everything, when it cried, when it learned to sit, and when it laughed for the very first time. Their bond was something special, something words could never fully describe. And so, in a small town where everyone knew each other, a stray dog who once had no home and a baby who once had no one became the heart of a story that inspired everyone. A story that reminded people that kindness can appear in the most unexpected places. That love can grow between souls who find each other when they need it the most. Elena. The baby and Lucky lived their quiet, beautiful days surrounded by care and warmth. And though the world outside kept moving fast, inside that small home, everything was soft, simple, and full of love. Sometimes heroes come without warning. Sometimes love begins at the sound of a gentle cry on a cold morning. And sometimes a tiny baby and a stray dog can change everything.